Hello, everyone. My name is always Asmal. Welcome to another episode of Tooways to Skin a Cat, a show where we talk career experiences, entrepreneurship, and investments. Main aim is to show that there's more than one way to be successful other than just climbing the corporate ladder. Today's show nearly didn't happen because of the storms in the Western Cape. We were cut off from the rest of the world for a while. The Wi-Fi cut for a while, but we managed to bring everything back together. So happy to be up and ready for the show today. Today is a solo episode. So if you are joining me live, drop a 1 in the comments so that I know I'm not talking to myself, and drop a 2 in the comments if you're watching the recording. Today I'll be sharing which podcasts I listen to in order to keep learning and growing. And most importantly, I'll be discussing why I listen to each one. This is also a follow-up session from when I was talked about how I make the most out of my week in terms of learning and growing whilst having a full-time job, a passion project, a wife, and 3 kids. A lot of comments have asked at that stage about which podcast I listen to, because I talked a lot about podcasts, and hence this is what this episode is about. So if you want to look at that episode, that session was posted on the 8th of August, 2023. So have a look at the episode if you want to get some more background. Most importantly, the podcasts that I listen to are a function of the things that I'm interested in. So if you're interested in something different, you won't necessarily like those podcasts that I listen to, but use the same template and you'll also be able to find the podcasts that you enjoy. I'm very interested in investing. I'm very interested in business. I'm very interested in startups, mindset, and how to be financially free. So I generally look for that type of content because that's more about what I want to learn. If you are interested in other things, then look for those things as well. There's lots of content available online. And if you're not interested in the things that I mentioned, it might not resonate with you. But if it doesn't resonate with you, it's up to you to find the podcasts that do resonate with you. All it takes is a bit of searching. You can't just sit back and say, oh, well, this doesn't work for me, so I'm not going to do anything. If you want to learn, if you want to grow, it's your responsibility. So you need to take control of that. Anyways, let's jump into why we are here. The podcasts that I listen to in no particular order are, let's go to podcast number 1. The one that I want to talk about is called the GaryVee Audio Experience. And that's hosted by Gary Vaynerchuk. This is actually the one that started it all for me. So listening to GaryVee pushed me to start my content journey, and it made me more interested in business in general. He talks a lot about mindset, and I've been listening to him since 2019. So as I've been listening to other things, I've actually listened to him less and less. As I grow, I'm listening to him less and less. It's still a great start for someone who doesn't know where to begin. You'll also never run out of content if you listen to him, because there's so much of his content out there. For those of you who don't like the swearing, that you might not enjoy him, but he also has a curse-free GaryVee show. So all the curses are bleeped out. So that's something just to look into. Podcast number 2, the All In Podcast. So this is a weekly show held by 4 experienced venture capitalists in the US. They talk about investments, they talk about the global economy, global events, and especially global events from a US perspective. So a lot of my macroeconomic knowledge or my macroeconomic approach is generally based on what I hear in this podcast. I also learn a lot about investing mindset from this podcast. They have specific topics that they discuss every week. One small section is called Science Corner. It comes a little bit towards the end, where they discuss new technologies that they expect to have impact on the world. So quite interestingly, that's where I learned about ChatGPT, and this was months before it became widely known. I mean, currently GPT is sitting at 3.5, and if you pay for the subscription, it's ChatGPT 4. They were talking about it when it was ChatGPT 2 and 2.5. So you learn a lot about what's coming by listening to that podcast. Podcast number 3 is called This Week in Startups. So one of the venture capitalists from the All In podcast also hosts a daily show about startup investing and business operations, or operating and running a business. I've learned to be a better business person by listening to the different perspectives shared about business, startups, and investing. The podcast also shares a lot about the venture capital landscape in the US. As the US is the biggest VC market, it helps you to understand VCs in South Africa and VCs across the world. Now I'm about halfway through, but something that I want to point out to you, just because I listen to this podcast doesn't mean I agree with every single opinion that they say. Sometimes they mention opinions that I disagree with, and I can use that as a way to question my own thesis. Just because you like a podcast doesn't mean you have to agree with everything that they say. Some of the opinions on some of the podcasts, you might like 70% of it. You don't have to agree with everything just because it's something you listen to all the time. It does help you to question your own understanding if they disagree. So it's something to think about. Podcast number 4, Alex Hormozi. So I don't know if you've heard of Alex Hormozi, but he's an entrepreneur who's built a few multi-million-dollar businesses, and he shares his insights on how he does it. There's a clip at the end of his podcasts that say he wishes Buffett and Munger and the Apple founder whose name escapes me at this point in time. I don't know why, but anyways, he said he wishes that they had documented their journey. So because they didn't, he is documenting his journey as a replacement for that. So that's, and I mean, I learned quite a lot about that. He talks a lot about leadership, and he talks about how you need to improve yourself first. His content is also very practical, and he gives good examples. Some of his examples can be extreme, but you learn nonetheless. So, for example, one of the things that he mentioned was, if you're struggling to change your approach or change the things you do every day, change your environment by moving to another place. If you really want to change your approach. So that sounds extreme, to move to another part of the country, but it's effective. So, but listen to it. Like I said, don't agree with everything, question it, but it helps quite a lot. And I see some of the people in the comments are also saying that they listen to Alex Hormozi. Oba King, thanks for watching, and I agree. His wife podcast also quite good, Leila Hormozi. Then podcast number 5. So this is not a specific podcast, but it's more a theme. So travel podcast. So last year I got the opportunity. Well, not last year. At the beginning of this year, I got the opportunity to travel overseas for the first time. Since then, I've become excited about learning more about the world and becoming a global citizen. Man can dream. So I've noticed that people who travel internationally on a regular basis start seeing country borders more as artificial than man-made. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm a proud South African, but I want to see the world. The podcasts that I listen to, or some of the podcasts about travel that I listen to, are way above my pay grade from a wealth perspective. But it gives me something to aim for. Also, just because I'm excited to travel more. So some of the travel podcasts that I listen to, it also ties in with business. Some of the travel podcasts. So there's Nomad Capitalist, there's Wealthy Expat, there's Passport Talks, there's the Expat Money Show. So it's kind of a combination between travel and business and finance and things like that. So it's kind of interesting. I'm just learning about it because I want to learn more about travel and what it would be like if I could travel the world one day. So that was number 5, which was a bit of a group. If you've got any questions, please add them to the comment section now so that I don't miss them, because I'm coming close to the end. Podcast number 6. Again, not a specific podcast, but more of a group of podcasts. So this group of podcasts I would call crypto podcasts. So I'm interested in cryptocurrencies as an investment class. I still sometimes struggle with what is this intrinsic value of this specific coin, because there's no discounted cash flow. It's a little bit hazy for me. But I can definitely see the value in instant payments across the globe, in smart contracts, in collateralized loans, in decentralized finance, and so many more things that are happening. So, and also I haven't made money from it, but I'm learning about the different use cases. And that's where I see the value, is in the different use cases, not just in watching the price go up and the price down. But yeah, some of the crypto podcasts that I listen to, I suppose number one for me is Crypto Banter. Now, Crypto Banter's got like 4 daily shows, but I only watch one because the other ones are more, I suppose they're more like daily traders, and that's not something I'm interested in. And also, if you listen to that too much, it makes you want to buy stuff. So I don't listen to all of them. I specifically listen to Rand Nguyen's show. So, like I said, the other shows are more short-term trading, but the Rand show on Crypto Banter talks a lot about macroeconomic events and how it impacts investments. So I learned actually a lot about investing elsewhere in global economics and the economy or the global economy just by listening to that podcast. So I also listen to something called the Pomp Podcast by Anthony Pompliano. He also talks a lot about business and long-term investing. So that's why I resonate with it. You'll see the theme. A lot of the things that I listen to, it's business and investment related, even if it's not. So it's because it's things that I like. Another crypto podcast that I listen to is called Your Friend Andy on YouTube. He talks about passive income and financial freedom, and he uses crypto as a tool. Again, I'm just building my knowledge. So those are the I suppose the 6 either specific podcasts or categories that I listen to. There's a couple of honorable mentions. I listen to a lot more, but I'm just trying to put out the main ones that I listen to. But there's a couple of honorable mentions that I want to talk about for podcast listening. There's a podcast called done by Codie Sanchez. So she is a former investment banker, and she talks about investing in boring businesses. So it's quite interesting. And then there's another podcast called Crypto Casey. She's a chartered accountant or CPA in America who's become financially free through crypto. So because she's an accountant, I listen to her because there's certain things that I can almost relate to. You know, accountants, we speak a different language sometimes. So that's why I listen to her. And there's another show called The Tom Ward Show. So interestingly, he doesn't fall into a specific category, but he has an interesting diversity of guests on his show. So listening to that show keeps my mind open because I'm not just thinking about investing. I'm not just thinking about this because they're talking about general things. Sometimes it's stuff I'm interested in, and sometimes it's like, okay, I didn't think about this. Let me think about that. So we've got a few questions coming through. Question from Andrea, who says, what podcast do you listen to in assisting you with your CFO role? How do you get on top of your game in applying yourself when listening to these podcasts? It's a great question. So for me, I mean, in terms of the CFO role, the accounting or finance part, like you know that from your studies, right? You know that. For me, when you step into the CFO role, the big change for me from, let's say, financial manager to CFO is that leadership. Or that's for me what it is, and that's where I needed the most help was the leadership part. So stepping into the CFO, I actually, like this week in startups, talks a lot about leadership. Alex Hormozi talks a lot about leadership. I've also got a coach that helps me with leadership. But for me, in assisting with the CFO role, the technicals we all know, or we've studied that coming through the teeth. We keep up to date with our CPD. We can do that easily. It's the leadership part that we not all of us have access to that sort of training. So in terms of assisting me with my CFO role, it's those same podcasts that I've mentioned, but it's the leadership portion where I gain the most value. Then we've got another question also from Andrea, who says, what podcast do you listen to help balance yourself with how you spend your time? That's a question. It's a good question. I balance, I don't know. So I've had this interesting theory about balance. I don't think, so personal opinion, so not to say that I'm right. Previously, I used to think like balance for me is not 50-50. Balance, it can be 30-70, it can be 90-10. Each person's balance is different. So for me, I'm interested in these things. So it's, even though it's a lot about investments and a lot about business, I listen to it after hours at like 9 o'clock at night because I'm interested in it. So it actually helps me balance. I do a lot of, like, when I go out for a run, that's also, and I go out into like going for a run near the beach or something like that. That's kind of bringing myself into nature and rebalancing. But podcasts, I listen to the ones that I listen to because I only want to listen to the things I'm interested in. I'm not going to waste my time listening to things that I'm not interested in. But that's also just a quick thought. So just to run through a summary of the podcasts that I've mentioned before, Crypto Banter, Alex Hormozi, the All In Podcast, This Week in Startups, the Pomp Podcast, Your Friend Andy, the GaryVee Audio Experience, Nomad Capitalist, Passport Talks, Expat Money Show, Codie Sanchez, the Tom Ward Show, and Crypto KC. Most of these podcasts are generally available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. There might be one or two. If they're not on YouTube, they will be on the other two. But generally, most of them are on YouTube. But yeah, they're also on other streaming platforms. And just a reminder that I'm not telling you to copy my exact approach. Each of us has strengths and weaknesses, and we're motivated by different things. I would like you to test and find out what works for you. So, I mean, use my approach as a guideline to starting and then adjust there. There's so much content available online. You can easily get lost down a rabbit hole. But if you keep watching the right content, you can grow your skills very quickly. Remember that it's important to implement those skills. So don't just listen passively and do nothing about it. Like, apply it in your work. Apply it in your, if you're interested in investing, when you buy and when you invest in something, apply the knowledge that you learn. Don't just listen passively, because I mean, if you're listening passively, it leads into analysis paralysis, and the other word, which is not very nice, which is mental masturbation. Don't do that. Like, actually apply the things that you learn, because that's where you're going to get benefit. If you're just listening, then what's the point? Also, every week I try to listen to at least one new podcast. This is how I find ones that I like, and it helps keep things fresh. I might listen for 5-10 minutes and say, okay, no, this is not for me, and I'll go back to listening. But the only way you're going to find things you like is if you try things, even if it means, okay, you're going to listen to one or two that you don't necessarily like. I don't see any other questions coming through, so I think that's a good place to wrap. The show has been live on YouTube and should be available on podcast by tomorrow. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on the podcast and you feel that it's added value, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click on that notification bell to get automatically notified when the next episode comes out. Thank you very much for joining me for another episode of 2 Ways to Skin a Cat. Goodbye.